Surrender revisited. Whatever happens, whatever is what it is, whatever what is what I want. Only that, but that. Galway Canal. Earthly things must be known to be loved. Divine things must be loved to be known. Blaise Pascal. Let this be clear from the start. It is a question that arises often. At a certain point, the implications of this annihilation, this total surrender of the sense of individual self, will begin to sink in, and you will begin to suspect that what is being talked about here is not compatible with the continuation of the familiar, of life as you know it. The question will arise, is it really necessary to die completely, to surrender everything? Isn't there some more moderate, less radical way of going about this? Some middle way to be found while not rejecting this life and myself as individual? And there will be many teachers, in fact most, who will comfort you by saying, yes, of course there is. All that talk of utter annihilation is metaphorical. Enlightenment is to be found even as you continue your everyday life. It is important to honor who you are. Negating that is being, well, negative. Other teachers will take it a little deeper and tell you, it is not the dying, not the surrender which is important, but only your attachment. Dying is good, not dying is good. Are dying and not dying equally good to you? And if you can say, sure, surrender, not surrender, who cares? Then you don't have to surrender. All of this sounds quite reasonable from the point of view of the dream. But from the understanding, it's just silliness. It is all predicated on the idea of there being someone there to die or not die, to surrender or not surrender, to continue a life or to be attached or be free. When there is the understanding, it is obvious that there is no such entity as you, to either be free or not, to surrender or die or not. It is the very idea that there is such an entity which is incompatible with the understanding. This movement to protect that sense of individual, this aversion to complete annihilation, runs very deep in the illusory self. It is the ego's sense of self-preservation. When faced with his own surrender in death, Jesus sweat blood and prayed that he be allowed to pass this cup by without drinking from it. But he recognized that this is not possible. Yet not my will, but thine be done. The basic understanding is that you do not exist as an independent entity or agent, but only as an object in the dream of consciousness. All this bargaining about surrender and death is just an attempt by that illusory agent, that non-existent doer, that fictitious individual to continue on in its mythical life. Nisargadatta Maharaj called the individual self the child of a barren woman. It's hard for any such individual to take this seriously, to accept that it has no existence other than as a myth, a construct in mind. But without this total acceptance, this complete surrender, the understanding, enlightenment, awakening, is by definition not possible. It is the ego rebellion of the mere object in consciousness, the usurpation of subjectivity, the setting itself up as a separate entity unto itself, which is the basic error, encoded in such myths as the Judeo-Christian story of the fall from grace, the original sin of the first humans. It is this mistaken concept of a separate, self-determining individual taken to extreme, which results in arrogant and destructive behavior towards others, toward environment, and so on. But even in its most basic, benign form, is the cause of separation, anxiety, and suffering. What is being asked is whether it is possible to awaken while remaining comfortably asleep. This is what the sense of the individual self, the ego, wants. And there are a multitude of teachers who will cater to this, who will bring you a wonderful experience in the dream and call it awakening. Awakening light. But listen to or read the true masters, the Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Huang Po, Hui Neng, Wei Wu Wei, even Rumi or Teresa of Avila, among others. When they talk about the understanding, awakening, acceptance, surrender, they use words like complete, final, total, utter, absolute. The very basis of the understanding is that you are not. This cannot be accepted without, at the same time, surrendering every vestige of the idea that one is, totally. Only the one who loses his or her life will find it. From here, it's obvious. There is no reason or motivation to water down this truth or make it more acceptable or politically or spiritually correct, so that more dream characters can believe in it while staying in the dream. Why would there be any such inclination? What is, is. If you hear this and it is not acceptable to you, that's perfect and wonderful. It is the perfect unfolding of the role for that dream character. Why would there be any interest in changing that? That this complete surrender of self should occur in the case of any dream characters at all, that any should wake up in the dream is a great mystery, in any case. Why should there be any motivation to make the teaching more moderate, more palatable, more widely acceptable? Acceptable to whom? Comforting to whom? Thinking that there should be an accommodation is foolishness, is continuing to take the dream and the dream character seriously, is confused thinking, taking illusion for truth and what is true for mere illusion. Essentially, the teaching contained in the perennial wisdom is what Ken Wilber calls an instrumental injunction. Such an injunction is an invitation. It lays out a way of thinking, perhaps even a set of practices, a kind of recipe that says, if you want to know this, try this. Try thinking this way, try doing this investigation. Try letting go of these cherished ideas and see what happens. Of course, perhaps even then, nothing may happen. There are no guarantees. Many have tried these ideas and fallen flat and gone back to their old ways. That is as it should be. But if it is to be approached at all, it must start somehow. Absolutely no one can directly convey what it is or what it is like. But if you attend to and follow the teaching, and by unspeakable grace it sinks in and takes hold, it becomes possible that direct experience and understanding of what is pointed to, what is presented indirectly by the teaching, may occur. Then you will be in a position to discuss, verify, question, or reject various ways in which the teaching is expressed, should you still have any interest in doing so. But until then, the idea of diluting the teaching to be more acceptable to dream characters, more compatible with what dream characters already believe and hold dear, is a silly waste of time. Within the dream, the common wisdom is that you must understand something before you can accept it. But this will lead at best only to intellectual understanding and intellectual acceptance. Characters in the dream cannot understand, evaluate, or judge waking up from that dream in any meaningful way. By its nature, awakening turns the whole dream on its head. Nothing applies. Rather, the understanding must be accepted before it can be understood. There must be awakening before there can be any evaluation or real understanding of awakening. That's why it's called surrender. And the complete total surrender and the complete final understanding are the same. Too many words. I am light within light. If you see this, be careful. Tell no one. what you've seen. Rumi. Only one koan matters. You. Ik kyu. It seems a shame there have to be so many words. Volumes and volumes from time immemorial. So much verbosity. Talking in circles around what is. Of course it has to be. The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. Lao Tzu famously started, but that didn't prevent him from going on to write the whole Tao Te Ching. Sing San did it, more succinctly somewhere in the 7th century with his Hisin Ming. It's all there, and just 8 small pages, the whole thing. The Heart Sutra got it down to 2 pages, and then has had uncountable treatises written about it since. Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj didn't write much, so others wrote down what they said, volumes of it. Wei Wu Wei, the eccentric Irishman, made pretty good sense of it, worked it out in, 6, 8 books? Ramesh, what is it, some 20 books now? And still going. But you see, it's necessary. It cannot be spoken, so it must be spoken around. Does exist cannot be expressed. As Wei Wu Wei lamented, even the best writing is like taking pot shots at the moon. No way will you be able to hit it. What is not of the dream is not of the dream and cannot be expressed in dream terms, but dream terms are all we have. In the language of two-dimensional flat land, where there exist only length and width, there are no words for height or depth, and with no words, no corresponding thoughts, no thought, no experience, because no such thing exists. It is always right here in front of everyone, but no one sees it. How then can you show it to them? If they could see it by looking at it, they would have seen it already. One usually starts like that. One points to what is seen and says, "Here, see?" And everyone stares at you blankly. So then the words start. Parables, funny little stories, sideways slants, sentences, ideas, started and not finished, left for the listener to follow. If you finish the sentence, the listener hears it finished, and it's finished. So if you leave it unfinished, at least there's a sense of something unfinished there, which may lead beyond. May not, doesn't matter. Eventually, U.G. Krishnamurti's apparently monstrous nihilism is the only thing that survives. There is nothing here for you. I have nothing for you. You have no true self, and the false self you think you are is of no significance. Go away, sleep your happy dream life. Why should you want this anyway? Self-annihilation is never chosen. The only one who comes to this are dragged kicking and screaming, or are tricked, lured into the jungle, and then ripped open, hollowed out, gutted, or accosted at a bus stop, blasted, moorings cut, left to drift. If you are going to be so dragged, so tricked, fine. Has nothing to do with me or with you. Meanwhile, all these words, all these books come out anyway. They also have nothing to do with me or with you. There cannot be writing. There cannot be talking. There cannot be reading and listening. In the immense overall pattern of galaxies swirling and planets being born and civilizations dying and words spewing forth, not a thing is misplaced or wasted. And so this writing, this talking happens, and there follow the so-called results for which it was brought into being. But in the unfolding of the infinite expression of what is, who knows or is to judge the result? Can the speck of dust in the arm of a swirling galaxy know why it swirls? Yes, perhaps. There is someone somewhere who may benefit at just the right moment from these words, at some time, near or far. Perhaps this is what someone needs. And they read or hear, and if not awakening, at least a deepening, a going back happens. Maybe perhaps the only result is that this happens, this is experienced. Whatever this is, here now. This conversation, this reading, this feeling, this nuance in consciousness, never before experienced in quite this way or in quite this combination. This would be reason enough. Stop. Everybody understands the single drop merging into the ocean. 1 in a million understands the ocean merging into a single drop. Kabir. Sitting quiet is most essential. Don't waste your time by not doing this. HWL Punja. Stop. Please, just stop. Stop talking. Stop objecting. Just for a moment, let quietness happen. Notice how you cannot do that. You cannot bring that about. Notice how objections and judgments and resistance continue to arise as long as they continue to arise. Let it be. Let quietness, stillness be. Notice how nearly every thought you have is a me thought, an I thought. Almost every thought you have starts with I or is about me or mine. I feel, I think. But it's not that way for me and my experience, where I am coming from, and so on. Even when those words are not used, the thought is important to you because you think of it as your thought, your opinion, something you feel about yourself or your reality. Drop it. Do not seek the truth. Only cease to cherish opinions. If you wish to know truth, then hold no opinion for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is a disease of the mind. Seng Tsan. When you are given the unspeakable grace, the unbelievable, undeserved, unearned gift of being able to see, to notice, that what you are thinking is an opinion or is something by which you identify yourself, the gift of being able to listen to yourself, then stop. Honor the gift by stopping, and let it drop. The opinion, let it drop. The bit of identity contained in every statement about yourself, every comment involving yourself, every question coming from yourself, let it drop. Let the grace of this moment of catching yourself having an opinion, talking as an I, let that grace stop you. Do you want to know how to live life? Be still. Be still means don't think. You see, it's so simple. Ramesh. Be still does not mean to stop moving the body. Be still does not mean to try to stop all thoughts and feelings from arising. Thoughts and feelings will always arise. Be still means letting go of that secondary level of thought, opinion, judgment, commentary. This is what it means to stop. No thought you have ever had is true. No opinion you have ever held is right. Let them go. No idea you have of yourself or of who or what you are has ever corresponded to reality, or ever will. Let them go. Comparing, sifting, learning, struggling, imagining, feeling, thinking, all chasing after wind. Instead, there's the awesome, overwhelming gift of stopping, of letting it drop. You must have a clear understanding that all things are only a manifestation of the mind itself. Everything in this world is nothing but a complex manifestation of one's mental activities. Lankavatara Sutra. Let it stop. Let it drop away. Stop taking it seriously. Stop taking it at all. Let it be. Be still. Simply stop. Let grace stop you. For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every force applied there is an equal force applied back. The world, the universe, Maya, only exists because of resistance to it. You push against it, it pushes back. The only way to freedom is surrender. You stop pushing, asserting yourself, and illusion stops pushing back, asserting itself. Stop pushing, putting energy into the system, and there is no energy in the system to push back. Stop telling the story. And without that constant input of energy, the story collapses. This, I suppose, is the law of karma. The only way beyond is to stop. Stop creating it. This is the purpose of self-inquiry. Who is it that is doing all this acting, all this pushing? The ego. The sense of a separate self has convinced you that the only way to survive is to push, to act, to make things happen. Because then the illusion will push back and seem real. And that is the only way that the sense of self, which relies on separation, can survive. Self-inquiry brings this to awareness. Who is it that is doing all this? Who is it who thinks? I have to do something. Who is the one who is thinking this? When this inquiry begins, some of the pushing stops, and so some of the pushing back stops, and things quiet down a little. As long as you are involved in pushing and making things happen, you appear to be the one doing things. The individual self is convinced that if it doesn't do something, nothing will get done, and it won't be able to survive. Which is true. It won't. But you will. If you stop, something amazing happens. The individual stops being involved, stops acting, and amazingly everything continues to happen without you doing it. Because, surprise, you were never doing it. Try this as an experiment if you can. The sense of separate self will panic as you come to the point where you stop doing anything. It may actually prevent you from stopping. But if the grace of stopping happens, and there is the experience of watching everything continue to happen, you will never again be able to believe there was ever anyone there doing anything. Explore your brain. You take your imagining for facts and my facts for imagination. Nisargadatta Maharaj. O God, help me. What a difference there is between hearing and believing these words and being led in this way to realize how true they are. Saint Teresa of Avila. Ultimately, anyone who has ever attempted to write about this or talk about it with the idea or intent of communicating some of it is engaged in a futile, pointless task. There is a basic problem here. And now I don't mean that what is outside human knowledge or experience or categories is inexpressible, which is also true. There is another basic problem on the other end, the receiving end. Human beings learn by association. The way the human mind is constructed, the way it is wired, is that it always has to have something to relate to. If something new is encountered, the mind will look in its data banks for something similar, however approximately, in order to make a comparison. If it finds something it has encountered before, which is somewhat or in some way similar, It will say, okay, this new thing is like this old thing, but different in the following ways. The next thing can then be seen, assimilated, categorized, learned. Education professionals call this schematic development. But if there can be found nothing in the memory banks that in any way corresponds to any aspect of the new thing, then to the mind it will have no meaning, and the new thing will not be learned or assimilated. The mind does not know what to do with it. In fact, scientists who study these things tell us that our eyes, for example, physically see many times more things each day, each moment, than our brains think we see. The nervous system filters out most of what is physically seen, because it is not familiar, and therefore judged to be not important. This is not something we can blame ourselves for and resolve to correct and take a seminar to learn to do differently. It's simply the way the organism functions. This filtering mechanism occurs on the level of the autonomic nervous system, before what you think of as your conscious self or your thoughts or your will or your intention even have a crack at it. We have all experienced the phenomenon of learning something new and subsequently seeing it everywhere, whereas before it had never been noticed. It had always been there, everywhere, and surely our physical eyes had seen it, but until the brain recognizes it as something that relates to something it knows, it is not truly seen. Given this mechanism, it is a wonder that anything is ever learned at all. As it is, learning happens only incrementally by way of what is familiar, what is already known. And we tend to learn more in the direction in which we were started. Wei Wu Wei puts this well at the beginning of his Ask the Awakened. Perhaps the most serious handicap is that we start on the wrong foot. In the end, this is likely to be fatal, and I fear it generally is. We have a basic conditioning, probably in some form of Christian religion, of which very little remains today but its ethical content, or in one of the modern psychologies, that of Freud, Adler, or Jung, or in some scientific discipline, all of which are fundamentally and implacably dualist. Then the urge manifests, and we start reading. Every time we happen on a statement or sentiment that fits in with our conditioned notions, we adopt it, perhaps with enthusiasm, and at the same time ignoring as though they did not exist the statements and sentiments which either we did not like or did not understand. And every time we reread the Masters or the Sutras, we seize upon further chosen morsels, as our own jigsaw puzzle builds up within us until we have a personal patchwork that corresponds with nothing on earth that could matter in the least. Not in 1,000 million kalpas could such a process produce the essential understanding that the urge is obliging us to seek. We are required to do exactly the opposite of all that. The opposite of all that, which is required for the understanding of what is what is known in Zen as beginner mind, a state of open awareness, a state of what Stephen Levine calls don't know. Spiritual teachers often make use of the image of the innocence of a young child in trying to express the empty openness necessary if one is to be able to truly hear the truth. But who can approach teaching like this? One hears the sage's words, and immediately the mind associates the words with what it knows as their familiar definitions and thinks it knows what has been said. This is why the masters use so many tricks, koans, meaningless phrases, stories that lead nowhere, statements that contradict themselves. Carlos Castaneda called the whole process of teaching by these techniques an attempt by the teacher to stop the world of the student. Gangaji calls on seekers to simply stop. But who can stop in this way? Ooh, that's good, thinks the seeker. That really resonates. We should all just stop. The idea or the expression that one should stop is simply added to the personal patchwork and the crazy jigsaw puzzle that corresponds to nothing keeps being built up. The seeker calls it a lifetime of hard-earned knowledge or even wisdom, but the masters and sages unequivocally call it ignorance. I've seen this in action. When I first went to see Ramesh, he was continually telling the people who came to him that the way to the understanding lies in realizing that there is nothing you can do. You are not the doer of anything. Events only happen through you. This was the basis of his teaching, and he repeated it ad nauseum. I would see people take notes, writing this down. Then the hand would go up. So, given this and I understand it perfectly, how do I go about my life? When I leave here, what should I do? Ramesh showed infinite patience. I wanted to shake them. Haven't you heard anything the man has said? You have just been given the secret of life, the universe, and everything. Stop, wake up. Let these words explode your brain. The trouble with students these days is that they seize on words and form their understanding on that basis. In a big notebook, they copy down the sayings of some worthless old fellow, wrapping it up in 3 layers, 5 layers of carrying cloth, not letting anyone else see it, calling it the dark meaning, and guarding it as something precious. What a mistake. Blind fools. What sort of juice do they expect to get out of old dried bones? These words were spoken by Chan Master Lin Chi in the 7th century. What has changed? Sometimes someone will listen carefully to the expressions of the understanding, that there is no doer of anything, that there are no individuals, that all there is consciousness, and that you are that. And they will say, "This all sounds a little theoretical. How do I integrate this into my daily life?" That's usually a good conversation stopper because the answer is, you don't. Actually, it's one of those questions like, "Are you awakened?" which from the point of view of the seeker is sincere and begs for a decent answer, but from the perspective of the understanding, makes no sense. Because the premise is back-asswards. It's a little like the tourist who stood next to me as we took in our first view of Cliff Palace, the ancient Anasazi ruins at Mesa Verde, a complete adobe village thousands of years old built in a cliffside in the Colorado desert. "Huh," he pronounced, "looks like a movie set." "But you see," I couldn't help but reply, "actually, it's the movie set, if it's a good one, that may look a little like this." You come across this all the time. Sitting on the porch on a summer evening, listening to the insects, someone will say, "That cricket sounds just like a cell phone." Sure, it's all a dream, all illusion. But even within the dream, the cricket is just itself. It was there before there were cell phones, and it is the cell phone that came later and was programmed to poorly imitate the chirp of a cricket. This is perspective, a mindset, which obfuscates clear understanding. As a first step, at least get clear on what it is that is real, and what it is that is the illusion, the construct, the derivative. Asking how you integrate the understanding into your daily life is like asking how you incorporate total freedom into captivity. You don't. Maybe it's the other way around. What remains of your life might be incorporated into the freedom of the truth. But in fact, there isn't anything there to incorporate. As Jed McKenna puts it, you're talking about reconciling the dream state with reality like it has to add up. Everyone seems to get hooked on that, but you can't do it. truth and non-truth are irreconcilable. Truth is, non-truth isn't. We can't insist on a truth that makes sense in light of what we know because we don't know anything. Adyashanti has simply said, there is no such thing as integrating truth into an illusion. If you insist on trying to fit the teaching into your growing patchwork jigsaw puzzle, your lifetime of learning and knowledge, you'll reduce it to just one more meaningless bit of ignorance. Please, don't. Don't try to integrate this. Don't take notes and go back and reread them and compare them to something you read somewhere else. This doesn't work like that. The only way this works is if you stop taking notes and start taking this personally, as it were. Take it very intimately. Let it stop you. Don't fit it into a lifetime of hunting and gathering for nuggets. Don't try to compare and sort to see how it fits in with other stuff you learned, other things that you have heard from other people. Especially if you are a seeker and have been at this a while, your head is probably full of other people's ideas, half assimilated into your patchwork of what truth or awakening or understanding is. Don't ask, how does this fit into what I already have accumulated? It doesn't. That isn't what this is about. If you are going to ask questions, ask instead the hard questions. The questions that take you out of anything you have ever known. The questions that could end your life. That's what this is about. Most of the folk I come across who are into Advaita are intelligent people. They are quick studies, and after they have read a few books and been to a few satsangs, they figure out what words and ideas are acceptable Advaita concepts. Ask them a question, and they don't answer right away. You can almost see the wheels turning in there, weighing and rejecting one answer after another as inappropriate, or likely to get them branded as one who doesn't know. They've been to enough teachers that they've learned to try to find that right answer that won't get them shot down. And it's hardly their fault. There are a lot of teachers out there whose sole functioning seems to be shooting down anyone whose answers are not phrased correctly. What good does this do anyone? Is it necessary to point out that this isn't about right answers? Speak your truth. There is nothing acceptable. There is nothing appropriate. There is only what is. Talking in circles, painfully and awkwardly trying to avoid using personal pronouns, when it is clear that your simple everyday experience is that you live your life as an individual, is pointless. Obviously so. This isn't an area where you can fake it until you make it. One person says, I am glad you came, and the other answers, who is glad? And I think the Advaita thought police never sleep. An old Chan master would give you a whap upside the head with his stick. What are you saying? Who is glad? She is glad, you dope, and she's being honest enough to tell you so. Descriptive, non-prescriptive. When there is no sense of a separate self, words referring to such a mythological thing will be superfluous, will naturally be used much less, not because they are avoided, but because they do not express what is, and are used simply because that is the way language is structured, and it is often the most convenient way to speak and be understood. There will not be searching for words or actions or responses which are imagined to be most appropriate, but rather there will be the simple, spontaneous expression of what is here. Speak your truth. That's what this is about. How can it be about the right thing, fitting in, using acceptable language? Stop. Go back. Self-inquiry is about going deep within to see what is your truth. Never mind what you have heard or what anyone else has said. This is not about learning the right thing from some teacher. A true teacher will deflect any such attempts back to you. What is your truth? Inquire within. Find out for yourself. Who are you? Who is the self from which all these things arise? No one can show you this. No amount of trying to guess right will reveal this. Discover it yourself by being relentlessly and ruthlessly honest, authentic, true. Exemplary behavior. The projections of others do not belong to me. I am never a teacher, just a lover who has been given a glimpse of the beloved. Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. The British General Wellington is said to have commented that a man can be a hero to everyone but his valet. The observation is similar to Jesus saying that no prophet is without honor except in his hometown. Awakening, or the understanding, does not in any case make a perfect human being or a saint out of the body-mind organism in which it has occurred. And those who feel they know the person most intimately may be the ones most likely to see the everyday imperfections and be the least able to see beyond them. That awakening should produce a perfect being is a deep misconception, and a popular one. People seem to think they need awakened spiritual masters to begin with, and further they need their awakened spiritual masters to be the embodiment of a certain set of usually traditional virtues. And since most traditional ideas of spirituality are pretty far divorced from physicality, emotions, urges, and feelings, people need their spiritual masters to be divorced from these things as well, especially from what is judged the negative or dark sides of these. All this is nonsense, of course. There is no such entity as an awakened spiritual master to begin with. In the manifestation of consciousness there are, among other things, these body-mind organisms commonly called human beings. According to the nature of these body-mind organisms, there arise, from time to time, emotions, urges, needs, thoughts, feelings, physical and emotional impulses. In the understanding, there is no judgment of any of these as negative or positive, light or dark, desirable or undesirable, appropriate or not. They simply are, and simply arise as part of the purely impersonal functioning of the organisms in consciousness. From the perspective of the understanding, where there is no longer identification as this particular body-mind organism, which particular body-mind organism is of no significance, including the body-mind organism in which the understanding has occurred. These things arise as part of the functioning of the organisms. So what? While one in whom awakening has not happened may well be concerned with whether they are or are not acting or emoting or thinking or appearing in any appropriate or enlightened manner, to the body-mind organism in which the understanding has occurred, this is of no particular concern. The whole issue only arises when there is identification as a particular body-mind. Why should there be any special concern or interest here whether the David thing gets sad or angry or occasionally feels confused or acts inconsiderately? These things may not seem desirable, but desirable to whom and from what perspective? They arise as part of the functioning of all body organisms in consciousness, according to the programming and conditioning of the organisms. When enlightenment happens, the organism does not become perfect. It is whole and the whole includes both opposites. Seeking perfection is basic, primary folly, and the jnani understands that. That is the basis of the understanding. Whatever happens is part of the functioning of totality. Ramesh. In this case, there is much in the conditioning and programming of the David body-mind organism to judge or dislike for those who are so inclined. Irritable, impatient, a tendency to be easily overwhelmed, and generally poor social skills, which can appear as arrogance or dismissiveness. Any behavior the origins of which are not understood can be easily labeled. And to the dismay of some who have been close or intimate, the understanding itself does not instantly produce a perfect human being, a saint. The dream character, to a large extent, continues to be the dream character it was, with essentially the same conditioning and programming. It seems certain that this organism was not designed to ever be playing the role of saint or beloved teacher. There is little here to inspire devotion. Much like the voice crying out in the wilderness, the iconoclast, the contrarian. Of course, from the point of view of the body-mind organism in which it occurs, the understanding itself, whatever else it is a massive dose of new conditioning. And so there are apparent shifts. The extreme sensitivity that is here in this body-mind is simply observed, along with its other characteristics, and not judged one way or the other. A certain startling compassion appears where before there was little, and I would have to say that there is a continual occurrence of what can only be called small miracles, considering the rough character in which they are occurring. Layers of old patterns of behavior and thinking that, without attention or effort, simply cease or fall away. The perspective, the perception from within is entirely transformed. I know I am not David, that David never existed except as a hollow and only apparent instrument through which presence flows. There is no longer any sense of being an individual self, only the deep, constant brilliance beyond light, the steady, profound peace beyond peace, and the constant upwelling gratitude for all and in all. From within, any undesirable characteristics are seen with indifference, perhaps some amusement. Undesirable according to whom? Questioner. Is it said that a realized person will show exemplary behavior in every way? Maharaj. Why exemplary according to whose standards? Thus, there is no particular motive to try to change myself, as none of these concepts have any reality, other than the ongoing acknowledgement, prayer, and all that is. Thy will be done, and the knowledge that this too shall pass. What will be, and then that too shall pass. In the course of this dream, there will be apparent change and molding of this body-mind organism, as there is of all such, but into what there is no knowing. My skin is not my own. This flies in the face of traditional ideas and the ego ideals of all the spiritual seekers who want noble, beloved, and definitely well-behaved spiritual teachers and masters to put on a pedestal, and who will show them by example the way to behave from all the messy, dark stuff of life. It's fantasy. Listen, there is no escape. What you want to be free from, what you reject, what you want not to be, want your teachers not to be, is it, is presence, is consciousness. This here. No one needs a spiritual teacher, certainly not one on a pedestal, to show them something else. There is nothing else. Judging it dark side or light side is the illusion. If you're not disillusioned with your spiritual teacher, he isn't doing his job. The spiritual teacher with his or her salt is in the disillusionment business. Not Raj. The heart is the only reality. The mind is only a transient phase. To remain as oneself is to enter the heart. Ramana Maharshi. Compassion is but another word for the refusal to suffer for imaginary reasons. Nisargadatta Maharaj. In front of me, on the desk, a rather unwieldy chunk of bronze, the theme of which you may or may not be familiar with, known as Natraj, or Dancing Shiva, what perhaps some of us knew during our folk hippie days as the Lord of the Dance. From the primordial stillness, Shiva dances the world into existence, and all the world exists as long as there is dancing. The world is the dancing, nothing more. Of course, all the details of the Natraj have intricate meaning in the Hindu myth. The number of flames, the number of cobras in Shiva's headdress, the image he's standing on, what he's holding in his hands, and so forth. This is an antique one, found in the depths of Chor Bazaar in Bombay, evidently broken and repaired several times, most recently my own raising a flame back on. Such is this life, intricate meanings, broken and repaired several times, the living of which is rich and deep as a cashmere carpet, that other artifact I dragged back from visits to India. This is what Tony Parsons means when he calls emotions the colors of life. Even the anguish, or the coming apart under stress, or the fear of the unknown, or the courage of moving into it anyway, or the thrill and wonder of being moved into it anyway, when it is seen that this too shall pass, that this is part of the dance, that whether or why this happens in this body-mind organism rather than another, or none at all, is of no significance. Then there is just running your fingers through it and actually enjoying, or at least appreciating, the texture, the depth, the indescribable beauty. None of it is taken delivery of, none of it is owned, none of it judged. Just constant total amazement, day to day. Nothing need be any different from what it is. You do not need to change anything. No one need be any different than they are. The difficulty with most systems of working on yourself, therapy, self-help, and analysis is that they become tools with which to judge ourselves and at the same time tools with which to prop ourselves up by justifying the judging of others. Forget all that. Just be yourself. It all just is. Listen, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Rumi. The ultimate unified field beyond all concepts of dualism, where I and you flow together. I is not David, you is not you, neither is, and I meet you there, completely with nothing lacking, because the I am that you are is the I am that I am. The rest is just day to day, and there is no way to do anything wrong. The only thing we can know for sure is that it is right and wonderful and essential for exactly this to be happening now. Beautiful and perfect. The human conditioning, emotions, feelings, thought patterns, all part of this world that has been pulled over our eyes to hide us from the truth. The effect is that we can never see clearly, only as in a glass darkly. Always fuzzy thinking, always missing the obvious. All these forms come and go, all will soon pass. The frustration, the sadness, the wanting things to be different, they too arise, in the quiet expanse of accepting awareness between the thoughts. They will never stop arising. There is no stopping them, and indeed no need to try. There is just watching, accepting what is. It is the judging that makes us miserable. When the mind is in bondage, the truth is hidden, and everything is murky and unclear, and the burdensome practice of judging brings annoyance and weariness. Sing San. In the jungle, the great quest to find my purpose, my path, and above all the way I can help, falls to the ground and disintegrates laughing. It is taking the dream to be real which creates the emphasis on finding a purpose or meaning, with a constant asking, why or how. Everything takes on importance. This seeming importance keeps us involved. A preliminary intellectual understanding of the teaching would lead one to conclude that the best way to help is to be empty, to stop trying to be helpful, and the best way to be caring is to stop caring and get out of the way. But it goes deeper than that. What is unfolding perfectly. There is no way to not be helpful. There is no way anyone can get in the way. Attachments and expectations around love, as caring and romantic and fulfilling and satisfying of deep needs, are often more deeply held even than attachments to physical things. And so many spiritual traditions and teachers emphasize non-attachment to others as a spiritual practice, to the point of actively disrupting and negating loving relationships. But truly, the whole emphasis on getting rid of attachments turns out to be misplaced. It's the prescriptive, descriptive fallacy again. Once there is seeing the true nature of things as they are, all things are seen to be elements in the dream and therefore untrue, not necessary, unimportant, and they simply lose their hook. Any attachment to them spontaneously evaporates. But trying to eliminate attachments in order to bring about the seeing is, of course, back-asswards once again, and doesn't work. How many people do you know have attained enlightenment, or even happiness for that matter, by doing violence to themselves in this manner, trying to cut out what is naturally there? Like everything, it simply is. And when it is natural for it not to be there, it isn't. You can't make this come about, even by making yourself lonely and miserable. Emotional attachments and relationships in general, like all behavior, remain inscrutable as long as you're still seeing it all as independently directed individual behavior. Whole sciences have been constructed around this. During and after 2 divorces and numerous relationships, I spent many years working on the commonality in the situations, talking to friends, and soul-searching, agonizing, trying to find where I was screwing up. With the understanding that all so-called human behavior is consciousness acting through these instruments, and there is no independent doer of any action, the subject becomes moot, and the judgment that there is something not okay and needing to be changed subsides. Shiva, the Lord of the dance, dances the dance of the heart, and all of this simply is. There are no mistakes. It is not possible to make a mistake. You are not the doer of any action, the experiencer of any experience. How can you be the maker of any mistake? What happens through these mind-body things happens. If there is learning to happen, it will happen. Sometimes there is not. Sometimes change happens, sometimes it does not. Sometimes such change follows insight, sometimes it precedes it. The perceived chain of cause and effect and the mandate to better ourselves are seen through as parts of the dream game. The source of suffering and unhappiness really is all this attachment, this hanging on to our cherished ideas, even though they obviously don't work and have never given anyone lasting happiness. But you see, why should anyone do that? Because you have no choice, obviously. But of course, none of it is obvious until the seeing happens. There is no thing to attain, nowhere to go. There is only acceptance of what is, on the deepest possible level, and even that only happens if it happens. If one is not ready to hear this, it will not be heard, no matter how well articulated. When one is ready to hear it, it can be said in passing by someone on the street, and it will strike home. When there is a body-mind organism in which this is ready to happen, a certain word or phrase in a certain context can be like in the Zen story, the sound of the pebble against the earthenware pot, which causes the cascade of failure of the mind and the occurrence of realization, which is the only possible end to suffering.